Fatwa TV. The world is thinking.
When sort of minority groups self-identify as different, when they when they form coalitions based on their religion, how do you go about sort of engaging with them on the grounds that they're something other than Muslim? I know you've written articles at the Times. Remember, you wrote a fantastic piece at the Times saying, why do we have to treat Muslims as Muslims? Why does the British government engage with Muslims on the basis that they're Islamic and forego their capacity to be everything else? But quite often, it's Muslims who themselves, or indeed, black people or lesbians or punks who self-identify. Isn't that going to be a problem for sort of overcoming that politics of identity?
Well, the question you have to ask yourself is why they have come to self-identify in those narrow terms. The point is that if you go back, as you said, to the late 70s, early 80s, they did not identify themselves in those narrow terms. By the end of the 90s, beginning of the 90s, end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, they did. And to a large extent, the reason they did so was because of a set of policies. It's not the only reason, but to a large extent, introduced by the state at both national and local level, which said these are authentic Muslims, these are authentic Muslim leaders that Britain is composed of, in the words of the Perret report on citizenship, a community of communities. Now, the point is that if state funding is linked to ethnic identity, which is what it became in the 1980s, if you want to, put very simply, if you want to get a community centre in Bradford, you're much more likely to do so if you say, I'm a Muslim, Muslims lack the resources and the funding, than if you say, I'm poor, this area is poor, we need community centres. In other words, state policy created or helped create those very categories of self. People don't just simply self-identify. People identify in relationship to something else, and they came to identify themselves in relation to the broader changes that were taking place. Part of that was a set of state policies, which now we call multiculturalism. Part of that was the decline of more universalist sets of identities. I grew up, I belong to a generation that thought of itself as black, I think of myself as black. And that's because for us, black was not an ethnic category, it was a political category. It meant non-white, it meant a definition of those who struggled against racism. Of course, now the idea that I am black, very few people understand, apart from those who grew up in the same generation as I did.
I was struggling.
And that's because black has become an ethnic label as opposed to a political label. And so the kind of the broader political notions have disappeared. And we've come to see ourselves much more in narrow senses. And part of Muslim self-identification is part of that process.